All right.
All right, what's up, y'all? Believe we're coming in live, loud, and clear. Please let us know if we are not. Wes Mitchell here with Chris Clark, as always, and as always, just give me a second to. Every time we go live on these things, we embed the video on our front page. We embed the video on our homepage, and then post it on our forum as well. And today we're going to be live on Instagram here shortly. Again,
That's a special guest on the IG as soon as I hit it.
Who we got?
Two special guests. We're going to shout out a lot of people, but two I recognize. Braden Webb, Gamecock Baseball. And do I miss y'all? Yes, he said. We miss you too, Braden. Good to hear from you. Also, Gamecock commitment Nick Barrett, I believe, is on board with us.
Okay, we'll see if they stick around here. Let me we got a lot going on at once, folks. So let me get going on the IG, and we'll be taking questions throughout. So if you have Gamecock questions, hit us up. Let's see. I need to request to join. All right, Chris, are you getting a request from me?
I am.
On the IG?
Here in just a minute.
Now
you got a picture of my unicorn.
Yeah, I believe you're turning around there.
Give us just a second.
All right. Believe we're all set up. Whose phone is going to fall first today is the question.
I secured mine.
Propped up on, basically on a cup. So, anyway, welcome in. We're going to do the best we can. Let's see. We got quite a few folks joining on Instagram. YouTube folks, hopefully y'all are getting in now as well. And put your questions in the chat, and we'll sort of go from there. Hopefully y'all aren't getting too much feedback right now. I don't know exactly the best way to do this. I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. But, yeah, hit us with your questions. We already had one question, and I think probably fits with what we've talked about for, I guess, much of the process. Much of the time we've done these has been about what's the deal with college football? Are we going to have college football? And this question came from our Gamecock Central forums, and the first question was essentially, what do y'all think about the possibility of having football? And I guess we've talked about that, I guess, a ton on these, but just to catch everybody up, and so I can go ahead and post the rest of these links on the site. Chris, you want to maybe give the latest that we're hearing on football and the chances of playing football?
Yes, I mean we're going to have a season at some point. I mean, I don't even know if that's in question unless you're in, say, California right now, because evidently from a lot of the stuff coming out last night, you know, the whether it's the high school football season or it's the college football season, there's still some serious questions about the timing for California. But most of the country, it seems like, is pretty on board with playing sooner than later. You know, when this all started, Wes, and this isn't anything new really that we're passing along, there was sort of the initial thought process, and once the shock of, you know, this shutdown sort of set in, it was, are we going to be playing college football anytime soon? Will there be a 2020 season? And then from that, it transitioned into, there probably will be one, but when? And so it's gone from, you know, is there going to be one, to, but it may have to be next spring. Now, you know, as the country has, and look, we're not getting into, or at least right now, we're not getting into, is it the right call or not, or what the opinions are on that, but just where it's at. The reality of the situation is a lot of states are opening up, you know, businesses at limited capacity or outdoors or whatever it may be, with certain rules in place, certain protocols. And it's looked like college football is moving towards that same type of thing where, it looks like it's probably going to start more on time. With 3 months or so, a little over 3 months to go, probably going to start on time. And it looks like there's going to be some types of protocols in place. One thing we've talked about is, for example, at a place like Williams-Brice, where you got over 80,000 fans, maybe it looks like 15 or 20. Maybe there's some certain protocols that are put into place with that. But it looks promising to have college football. Undoubtedly, it's going to look different for the fans. It's going to be a different experience for the players because of all the different protocols of testing and certain things that'll have to be put into place. It's going to be a lot of work, but that's sort of where it's at right now. It looks like we're going to have a season sooner than later, unless some things drastically change. Again, Wes, they're planning all that. They have to plan this out in advance, and they have to plan, okay, when we're getting back on the field, how do you do it? Because the players and the coaches have to have time to prepare. So there's still a lot of time between now and then for things to improve, or there's also time where, maybe something else happens to where you got to pump the brakes a little bit. But right now, I think you'd probably agree with me, right? It seems like it's more on course, for things to, on the current trajectory to start more on time than not.
Yeah, I think so, man. I mean, everything you hear right now is that there's going to be a college football season. And, frankly, I think from a financial standpoint, schools are seeing that they almost have to, and not that it's going to be a situation where you're going to be trading the health of, of people involved, but it's more like, okay, let's find a way to try and do this and do it as safely as possible. And I think looking around, you see more every day about Major League Baseball trying to get back, the NBA trying to get back. I know that Major League Baseball has some serious conversations right now about sort of how they're going to go about doing that. And we went into that last week here on our little show, was that, hey, that there has to be a way to where there's some structure to doing this, and there has to be a way to test guys a lot. There has to be a protocol in place. The most interesting thing I think we've heard this week is that the NCAA has said that they are not going to essentially require everyone to be back at the same time, which I think opens the door, a bit, because every state is going to be different. The fact that there hasn't necessarily been a complete national response to all this, a lot of it has lied within, the state level, to where decisions are being made based on what's going on a state-by-state basis. So I think when you look at that aspect and the NCAA now saying, everybody doesn't have to be back at the same time, then I think you're probably going to see the SEC band together and try to figure out a plan to make all this work.
And here's the other thing, Wes, is I almost can't believe I want to say this, but the NCAA saying that actually makes sense. But I think their hand's a little bit forced because, like I mentioned earlier, you got the Pac-12 and, or maybe just the California schools in the Pac-12 or whatever, sort of off doing their own thing, right? A little bit, which, that's their prerogative. We don't need to get into that part, but there's going to be, it looks like, at least right here where we're sitting, a little bit of a disconnect between maybe some of the schools in the Pac-12 who do want to play and, the California schools. And so I do agree with you that I think the SEC will band together, but it would be very hard for the NCAA to come out and say, we've all got to be back exactly this time, exactly the same plan. I do think that there's a push to try to get some type of national level plan as far as protocol, or just how long teams have to prepare once they do get back into it. As in, here's the date you can start back and here's how much time you get to prepare. They have to do that because you have to have everybody on that even playing field in terms of, okay, you get 6 weeks to prepare, 8 weeks to prepare. So they do have to do that. But I think there probably will be, like you said, a banding together of some of the schools. And here's the other thing that was brought up to me, just in some conversations I had that maybe I didn't think about quite as much, is that, we've talked a lot about the fans, how do you get the fans in the stadium? And we've talked some about with players, how do you keep them safe? But, what if a football team begins the season and then the season abruptly ends because you get, a big segment, let's say the entire offensive line tests positive, or something like that. Now, teams will have to have, and we've seen a big push to this of teams really devoting resources to this. And, do you test them in and out of the building every time? Certainly, you're going to have to test them before game day to prevent it from spreading around. Even though, younger people are lower risk for sure based on the data so far, you still can't let it spread around from team to team or segments of the team. And when you're talking about football, these guys practicing against each other, being in the same meeting rooms, being in close contact, being on a college campus at large, is sort of hard to isolate. And so, whether you're insulating during the week or after, somebody may test positive. So there'll have to be regular testing. Presumably, if somebody does test positive and everybody else they've come into contact with is fine, then you play them. But it is a concern that coaches and administrators have, Wes, is just, hey, what if you lose your starting 5 offensive linemen? How are you going to go in and play? If you get a bunch of players on the team, can you still play? Now, what are the odds of that? I really don't know. Could it happen? Sure. And it's just another one of those scenarios that, that they're going to, still have to run through. Wes, can we go ahead and hit a couple questions before we forget that relate to this topic from Instagram?
Yeah, you talking about on Instagram?
Yeah, on Instagram. So I'll sort of go in reverse order. So Seth 6138 said, "What parent would allow their student athlete to play? Y'all are dreaming." A lot of them, honestly, I don't think it's a dream. There are a lot of players and parents who, whether or not we agree with it or listeners agree with it, certainly everybody's entitled to their opinion. But we've heard from some of these people, Wes, whether it's, high school football or college football players, parents, coaches, when they have the season, because it is going to happen at some point, it'll be different, as we said, for players, coaches, fans, everybody. But there's a great demand for it. And so there's going to be plenty of student athletes, parents that let them play, or student athletes that, are of age and decide, hey, I'm going to go play. You understand, if there's some type of risk, you understand that. If you're a fan and you go into the stadium under certain protocols, that you're going to need to understand that. And schools have certainly had to think about liability. But I would imagine, Wes, there's going to be really, really strict protocols in place for player testing. And, that's going to be probably part of the deal in going to play. Kyle Foster, 95, and Steph Smith both brought up fans in terms of, okay, if you allow 15 or 20,000 people in the stadium, how do you decide who gets tickets? 30,000 or so season ticket holders. This is actually something we wrote about on Gamecock Central recently, in that they're running different scenarios. So you're probably going to have to do, maybe a lottery. You break it up between students, longtime donors, big donors, and a lot of people are going to be left out, probably the public at large, visiting fans. What do you think, Wes?
Yeah, and here's the thing: if there is a certain risk, but I think we're at the point where a lot of people are sort of ready to at least start trying to find a way to get back to normal, and that doesn't mean that you think the virus is a hoax. That doesn't mean that you think it's made up. That basically means that now that there's a little more information about the virus, originally there was not. And I know we've talked about all this stuff, I feel like, for a month now. So I do want to get to some like recruiting and some of that stuff as well. But, here's the thing. We do know a little bit more about it right now. We're starting to learn exactly maybe what we can do and can't do. And there's going to be differing of opinions, but people are going to want their lives back, and people are already starting to make decisions to get their lives back. And I think at this point, we just have to try and make it as safe as possible, because I think we're starting to see people are going out anyway. People are getting back, into their daily lives. So we have to try to use the information that's there and try and make it as safe as possible. And I think that's what the universities, let's not just talk about football. Universities across the country are going to have to make tough decisions. These are students, let's forget the student athlete part. There are students who are just looking to get their college experience back. And their businesses and, people that have their livelihood tied up in those businesses that are looking for that part to come back. So there's always a give and take, I feel like, between the safety of something and, and living your life. There's a give and take sometimes financially as well. So, and all that gets even a little more political than I want to go. But in every decision in life, there is a give and take. And I think we're finding some people are on one side of that and some people are on the other. And a lot of people hopefully are more towards the middle. But anyway, all right, we do have a few more questions. And there's a question I saw come up twice about conditioning. And that is a major part of the conversation. That's not something that's just been forgotten. Conditioning is a big part of it. They want, as far as Muschamp's concerned, 8 weeks to get ready. Now, will it be exactly that or not? Who knows? I know Chris has talked about some of the different scenarios there in the past, but the conditioning aspect is not something that is lost on the administration, both at South Carolina and at more of a conference or even NCAA level. So I think you will see something in place where the guys get back and can get themselves conditioned, and then we'll be able to move forward playing the career or playing this year, I should say. Let's see. All right. Let's hit a couple of these YouTube questions. Adam, no, let's see. We got Trad Saley, I believe is how you say that, with our first YouTube question. What do you think Mike Bobo's offense will look like? And do you think it can be successful in today's SEC? Chris, I will let you take that. And I see we've got some Instagram questions as well. So we're just going to sort of go back and forth between them.
Yeah, I mean, so that is a great question on Mike Bobo. And I think in some ways, we really won't know until, maybe even the season or throughout the season, because there's so many different factors at play. Number one, the offense that he has run and will run is pretty multiple. So a lot of people, when they think of Mike Bobo, they think Georgia, I formation. Sure, they'll do some of that. But when he got to Colorado State, which was 2015 through 2019, the head coach, and he still ran the offense, he really evolved into where sometimes, Wes, they're opening the game in 4 wide, and they've got an H-back out there. They're in shotgun. Next drive, they're out there in I formation for 2 or 3 plays. So there's a lot of versatility to it, and there's a lot of different parts to it. And one thing that Mike Bobo made clear, he had a pretty lengthy press conference when he first got to South Carolina and was asked a lot about what is the offense going to look like. And he said, look, he basically said the equivalent of we're not going to fit, try to fit something that isn't working, square peg, round hole, all that type of thing. They're not going to do that. They have to figure out what their players can do best. Well, here's the other element of it. They still haven't been able to figure that out fully. They have game film. Yeah, they had 5 spring practices, but that's it. They haven't had their full slate of spring practices to get their hands on their players. They've been able to do virtual stuff, but that's something that they needed spring, and they needed summer conditioning, and then they needed a full preseason camp to be able to answer that. All that's going to be condensed. Obviously, some of the spring was eliminated. It was great for them that they did get a third of spring practice under their belt, but they're still trying to answer that question, about what can they do. So I guess if I had to answer it, I would just say it's probably going to be multiple. They have, Adam Prentice, for example, a guy where they do have a fullback they can utilize some. Obviously, the running game is going to be big, but there's some different things they can do. Secondly, can it be productive? I think so, based on track record. Now, does South Carolina have the personnel that Georgia had in 2011, 2012? No, there's not an AJ Green on the roster. There's not a guy, Aaron Murray, who passed for 3,000 yards every year of his career from freshman year on to senior year. There's not a backfield that has Todd Gurley and Keith Marshall in it right now. But he has shown that he's adapted. He's put up some really good offenses at Georgia. So recruiting will be a key for South Carolina going forward. They got some work to do. They got to add some playmakers. But schematically, I think Bobo, has the tools to be able to do it and be able to utilize his players.
Yeah. By the way, we got a couple of questions coming in.
Actually, I think I was muted there for a second, but we got a couple of questions. And hey, let's try this. When I'm talking, I think you need to mute yourself, Chris, on Zoom,
Okay.
because I think the feedback is coming through my mic, and then when you're talking, I'm going to mute you because I think it's going through twice basically. But let's see. We had a question and I lost it. About tickets and the lottery. And they said if there is a lottery, and obviously if there's going to have to be some type of way to structure it if you're not one of the folks that gets in, basically. What is the situation for you? We don't know the answers, but I think that was Steph Smith that mentioned that. I'm not sure, but I believe Ray Tanner has already said if they're going to do everything they can to work with you to where you're not going to lose your tickets if if you have consecutively bought tickets. You're not going to lose your tickets for the future based on what happens this year. So they're going to work with people. I believe they've already pushed back some dates as far as payments and stuff like that. But it's not going to be a situation where you get screwed over for your future tickets based on this year, because we all know there are extenuating circumstances and a lot that it's going to go into this year that will probably hopefully never apply again. So anyway, got a few more questions on both sides. Murphy Fulmer, how many games we play this year? I mean, in theory, all of them. I think that's the plan right now. That's the plan. Then you adjust. Let's see. Grace Sorrells Media. Grace, a very good graphic designer from Rock Hill, says she's ready for Carolina football. Agreed. And we had two questions. We had a question on YouTube and on Instagram about Tyrion Ingram Dawkins, who is the Gaffney football player who may or may not be announcing on Sunday. The YouTube question said, well, with him pushing it back, does that help South Carolina? And the other question was about him as well on Instagram. I don't remember the details. The thing right now is he may not have actually pushed it back. Still a good chance, I guess, that he could be announcing on Sunday. Will that be South Carolina? Will that be Tennessee? Will that be a surprise team? Of the six, Chris, and I'm going to let you take over. Of the six, I think those are the primary two to watch. Georgia was one that for the longest time I thought was going to be South Carolina's biggest competitor for Tyrion. I think the hype that Tennessee has been able to produce on the recruiting trail, sort of the social media buzz they have right now, has caught a lot of guys' attention, and I think that includes Tyrion. So I think Tennessee has sort of passed Georgia as South Carolina's biggest threat. Now, will he actually decide on Sunday? Will it be South Carolina? Will it be Tennessee? Will it be over at that point? I mean, I think those are all questions that we still have. And make sure to unmute yourself, Chris.
Yeah, so I think I agree with you there. That's probably the number one thing to keep in mind, is that no matter what happens, even if it's South Carolina, I think a lot of people will be celebrating, and hey, rightfully so. But it's not going to be over. I mean, this situation where, Ingram Dawkins is blown up with a bunch of offers. He's very active on social media. He's very engaged with the recruiting process. And he's not alone in this, and that I would anticipate he's going to continue communicating with college coaches. We're in a very unique situation, Wes. We keep going back to this from a recruiting standpoint. There haven't been any visits since February. And so that leaves, you keep in mind that you miss out on spring and summer unofficial visits, official visits, which have been allowed for a couple of years by the NCAA during that same period. There's no camps. And then there's, when you open back up the season, it might just be a flood of trying to get guys back on campus because you haven't done it in so long. And so I think Ingram Dawkins and others, there's going to be a flurry of activity when the season begins, whenever in-person recruiting opens. That's another question. We don't know. It might be right during the season. They might push it a little bit later. Some people in the college football industry don't think we'll have in-person recruiting at any time before the season. If that's the case, then they're going to cram a lot of activity in along with preparing your team every week. So I just think I agree with you that those are the three main programs to watch. There's certainly been some conflicting info. And, one reason for that, Wes, is maybe that Ingram Dawkins himself has been a little bit conflicted. That certainly happens a lot in recruiting. I think that's the case here. But South Carolina is sort of that common thread. Most people either think it's South Carolina or Tennessee or even South Carolina or Georgia over the past few days. I think he seemed to sort of had his mind made up. Then coaches continued to hit him up, and it sort of muddied the waters. And that's how recruiting goes. So again, all that points to and adds up to, I think, no matter what happens on Sunday, if he does go through with the decision, probably one still to watch right there.
Yeah, definitely. We've got a few more folks joining. DL Coach 91, I believe, is Rashad Jackson from EPT up in the Anderson area. That group that does a great job training football players and prospects in the state of South Carolina. Rashad works with the defensive line and actually worked with Zach Pickens, South Carolina 5-star defensive line. Let's see. I'm going to get to Kyle Foster leading us right into one of our other guys of interest. You feel pretty good about J.J. Jones. Chris, I know you picked up some new info there recently as well. What you got on J.J.?
Well, Wes, I think South Carolina's in the mix there, and maybe not to say we didn't believe South Carolina, was out of it by any means. We were just sort of unsure. We thought maybe North Carolina or Georgia had more traction, and look, maybe that's indeed the case. I did hear that South Carolina's firmly in that mix there. It was an offer that Jones had really wanted. He has obviously an existing relationship with Luke Doty from last season. They played together at Myrtle Beach High. JJ's a really high upside guy. First year playing receiver last year full time and had a really big year. Has a lot of potential. And so, yeah, some others got a little bit of a head start on South Carolina. And the timing's very interesting in that he's considering making a decision July, August timeframe. And I think that timing is really interesting. But there are some indications there that South Carolina is firmly in the mix. And only about, Wes, I think 5 or 6 in-state targets to watch this year, and he's one of them. So a significant prospect to watch there.
Recruiting's been very interesting with this shutdown, basically, where you can't take visits. And I don't think any of us really knew exactly what it was going to look like, how recruits were going to react. And we've seen recruits commit at a crazy rate. I think a much higher rate than any of us expected. And if you look at the numbers, I don't know what they are, but certainly more commitments across the country, not at South Carolina, I just mean in general, now than this time last year or this time the year before. I think some of these kids are bored. I think the fan bases are bored as well. There's no actual sports, so maybe following recruiting becomes maybe something a little bit bigger in their lives. So maybe kids are getting a little more attention. I think coaching staffs have been able to give the kids maybe a little bit more attention, at least virtually, over Twitter, over Zoom, which is the popular thing right now, FaceTime. And guys are getting caught up. What happens? Because when they can visit again, which we don't know when that's going to be at this point, when they can visit again, the floodgates will open. Kids will take visits. I'm guessing very few committed guys will just be shut down and not visit anywhere. You're going to have committed guys visiting all over the place because, A, they haven't gotten to experience the recruiting process as much as they would have. So they're going to take visits, and then I think it was record commitment season. I think it's going to be a record decommitment season in a few months. And we're going to see where, it's all going to shake up and explode, and we're going to see where the chips fall, I think. And it'll be interesting to see which schools are still standing and which ones aren't, and how many guys actually go through this process firmly committed and without taking a visit anywhere else. I think a lot of kids that have jumped in and maybe even reserved a spot at a team are going to be out and about visiting. And then here's the other thing. Senior year of high school football has been devalued over the last increasingly devalued over the last decade because recruiting has gotten earlier and earlier and earlier. No spring evaluation period this year, no summer camps for evaluation this year. That means the senior football season, I think, will actually matter again. And you're going to see guys who pop onto the radar and pick up senior offers during their senior season, probably at a higher rate than we've seen it all, in recent years. So how much of an effect does that have on these recruiting classes as well? I think will be a storyline to watch in a few months.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it's interesting. South Carolina's in a really unique position because they need, we didn't know. I'll back up a little bit. We weren't sure really what type of effect this would have on recruiting. And there has been a flood of commitments and guys pushing their decisions up. There have been some, and those won't garner as much attention, that have said, look, I need more time. I'm going to push it back. I talked to a prospect out of Florida yesterday who's literally visited one school. He's been to Florida. He's got 20 offers. She said, look, I got to go visit some places. The other side, we're seeing prospects who have not even visited the school that they're committed to yet. And now that happens some in recruiting, even without this. But what I'm saying is you've got, especially in the Southeast, it's cutthroat. And so if you're a school like, let's use Tennessee as an example because they've garnered so much buzz, they've got 21 commitments. If we didn't have a recruiting shutdown right now and they had 21 commitments, they would have to be looking over their shoulder because they're going to have other schools continue to look at their commitments. Those commitments are going to take visits elsewhere. There have already been multiple commitments from Tennessee's class that are already planning on visiting South Carolina or other schools around the Southeast. That's going to happen. But now you've got this very unique circumstance in which you have seen some guys committing to sort of basically hold a spot. They can hold a spot. Maybe the school they're committed to sort of holding a spot or getting a guy. So all that's really just amplified at a time like this, that cutthroat nature of recruiting. So look, if we didn't have any of this with early commitments, it almost always gets interesting in the Southeast. Can you hold on to them? Do they take other visits? If they do take the visits, how strong are they? How weak is their commitment? What are the contenders? Who are the threats? That happens anyway. Now I think that's even more so the case. And so I'm with you. It's going to be really, really interesting to see, which guys stay in classes, who takes visits. It's really going to be condensed, I think, into a period. And I wonder, Wes, secondarily to this, I assume there's still going to be an early signing period. I don't know if there's any reason to eliminate it if a guy's ready, but do we see more guys this year push it to February? I think that could be another byproduct of all this.
Yeah, I think certainly we will. I'm with you. I don't think they'll eliminate it because the coaches would flip out, I think, because they're going to be ready. They're going to be ready for this thing to be over. So, I think basically you're going to see it possibly get pushed back for some kids and some kids will go ahead and get it over with and it'll be up to them. But yeah, it'll be interesting, man. I mean, this thing has so many layers. It's not just, recruiting, football, it's everything. And I'm curious to see how high school football programs are able to deal with safely coming back as well, because, college football programs have the financial means to bring on specialists and stuff like that, and to put in these very elaborate schemes to make sure everybody's able to stay healthy. How do the high school, football programs across America handle all this? So that there's a lot involved, and it affects everything from top to bottom. I mean, you would be very, very, it would be very difficult to find anything that's not affected by this virus right now. Let's get a few more questions. Tyler Clark wants to know what is going on with recruiting in the areas of most need right now, specifically safety and wide receiver. What guys that are elite or high caliber is South Carolina still in the running for? I think there's several guys. One thing we've seen in the past is that the defensive back, well, first of all, South Carolina sort of recruits defensive backs to cross-train them. They'll have guys, we think this guy's a safety nickel, or we think this guy's a corner. that doesn't always hold up. Sometimes a corner ends up being a safety. Sometimes a safety, oh, wow, this guy's better in coverage than we expected. He ends up playing corner. So that I sort of just look at them as DBs in general. And receiver, I agree. I think this is a situation where you have a new coach in Joe Cox. I think South Carolina is a bit hurt right now by the fact that kids aren't able to come visit and meet their potential future coach. And I think that's holding them up with some guys. We mentioned J.J. Jones, some conflicting info, with him right now. A lot of North Carolina buzz. There's some South Carolina buzz. I think some other schools are in it as well with JJ. But Malcolm Johnson Jr., someone from Virginia, he's a 4-star kid, probably literally the fastest receiver in the country, if not top 5 or so. And he's someone South Carolina has been firmly in the mix with for pretty much the entire process. Kyle Krantz has done a great job. They haven't been able to get him on campus, and it wasn't because he didn't want to come to campus. It's just it hasn't happened, but because visits have been shut down. So, there's a lot of guys that are out there. I guess I look at Simeon Price from Florida, who's an athlete for South Carolina, that they are on the top 10 list that he announced today. He's another top target for them at receiver. Nyland Green is a defensive back from Georgia, 4-star guy. I believe he's more of a cornerback for South Carolina. Let's see, who are some other guys we can throw out there, Chris, that match big-time receiver or defensive back category?
I would say, Breon Pass may not be as highly rated, but he's a guy that the staff seems to really like.
Very talented kid.
Really talented. Here's another layer of that one is he has to decide, apparently going to decide on June 1st or announce at least, which sport he's going to focus on in college. So if it is football, then certainly he becomes one to watch even more. If he chose to focus on basketball, he can go play somewhere at that level as well. But he's one that maybe he's not a 4-star guy, but the staff he's close and the staff seems to really like him. Dink Jackson is another one, Wes, out of Florida, I believe that the staff seems to like a lot. And he's a 4-star guy who the staff's recruiting as a safety or nickel. So he would fall into that safety category. Damon Harmon, you already mentioned him, right? Harmon out of Virginia. No, you did not. No, you didn't mention him. Okay, yes. So he's one. He's another guy that the staff seems to really like, as a defensive back prospect. J.J. Jones obviously would be one. So those would be a few guys that come to mind. And, I can't sit here and say, well, defensive back recruiting will shake out more in camp this season as it typically does, because it won't. We're not going to have that camp season to go through that. So defensive back recruiting is going to be sort of interesting, and really all the spots are interesting. So there are several candidates on the board, and for South Carolina, look, they need to get to the season. A race last year, have some guys either not commit or stay open, even if they do commit, which I imagine will happen in some cases. Get to the season, try to win some games, project some stability, and I think they'll have a chance to pull some of these guys.
All right, I can't.
Because I keep forgetting. But okay, I would say without actually having the specific information here, not trying to speak for them, I think Horn definitely has always just struck me as being a guy, even when he signed. NFL bloodlines, obviously. His dad was a star wide receiver. He has looked like an NFL player literally from the second he stepped on campus. And I think there's always just been a sense for me that he was going to be 3 years and gone. Most of the time, guys like that end up leaving early. So I'm not sitting here saying there's a decision made or speaking for him or anything like that, but my guess on Horn would be more than likely, if he has the year that he is expected to have, that he's out of here. Izzy, I could see that being a little bit more up in the air. I think Izzy is sort of a unique case. His length, his unique skill set is going to be very intriguing for the NFL guys. And I think some NFL teams will wonder, can he move well enough and stuff like that. And then some NFL teams, depending on scheme, are going to love him for the length. And so I think he's going to have a more interesting decision in that I think JC is just a bit, at least by my eyes, is a bit further along as a player. Whereas Izzy, teams are going to see a ton of potential there. And Izzy's going to have a decision to make, a decision on his hands. Both those guys seem to love South Carolina. I think they love playing at South Carolina. They've both done their part trying to recruit other guys to join them here. I don't think it's one of those things where they're just like, some guys are just ready to get out of school, ready to move on. I don't see it like that, but I think it's just going to be a business decision for both those guys.
I think that's a great point. And look, really what it normally is or what it should be for players is if you are a first round pick or have a really good chance to be one, at least you should go. And JC, if he has, people can say, well, he needs to get an interception in his career or whatever it may be. But in terms of talent, the measurables, how good he is in coverage, he's going to have a chance to be a first round guy. There aren't many things you look at there and go, I don't really see it, or he just checks all those boxes. And he's got the appropriate mentality, I think. And I think he's going to have a nice season. If he does that, he's going to potentially get a first, second round grade, probably, I think. And if you get that, there's a good chance you go. I'm with you that Izzy is a little bit more maybe up in the air just because of positional projection, maybe showing a little more consistency, or, what are the testing numbers? Everybody looks at the Georgia game, which was a fantastic performance by him. And I think that's led to more of the buzz. Not that it was undeserved based on that, but certainly, like you've seen some lists where McQuamu's maybe higher up on the board than Horn. I think you put Horn higher up right now as a pro prospect. Both those guys are certainly going to have a chance to be draft picks. But if I had to put money on it, I would say Horn would be the one, more likely to leave after this season, because I think he's going to have pretty high stock.
Yeah. Another question here from Blackman. Expectations for Ryan Olinsky, and mentions that there was not much of a running game last year. He should have help there this year. Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things that Bobo said when talking about Olinsky during the spring was, hey, we got to do a better job around him. And, Chris, I took that to mean everybody, as in the offensive line, the running backs, the coaches. I think it was kind of a situation of, hey, this was a freshman being thrown into the mix, and was it up and down for him at times? Absolutely. I think Ryan himself would tell you that. But was there great play around him all the time? No. I think across the board, I don't think anybody was immune to that. So I think you look, Marshawn Lloyd, you're going to see a heavy dose of this kid. True freshman or not, you're going to see Marshawn Lloyd, I think, get the chance to be a feature back and be a guy who becomes a household name in the SEC. I think he's that good, and I think the need is that great there for South Carolina. So, I think offensive line should be in pretty good shape. The question for Olinsky, as far as the guys around him, I think, is wide receiver. Can the wide receivers step up and help your quarterback? If that happens, then I think, Olinsky should have a pretty good year. All signs are that he's doing the right things in the offseason. If not, he's going to be pushed by Colin Hill, and I think he's going to be pushed by Luke Doty as well. All right, dude, we've got a string of questions, so let's sort of try to fly through them so that we can get them all. And if you want, dude, we can just tag team them and go back and forth. So you can take Riley B413. Thoughts on Cam Smith and his potential this year and the upcoming years?
Yeah, I think, Cam, I think, had almost some unfair expectations put on him heading into his freshman year, based on billing. He had to get bigger, more physical, continue learning. High upside player. He showed a lot of flashes of physicality in high school, whether it's camp or on the field. And he's a player that my understanding was he was having a good spring. The staff was happy with his development this spring. He needed time last year. I was not surprised that he redshirted at all. I think it was one of those classic situations where a guy, especially an in-state guy, who's sort of highly ranked, comes in and there's some lofty expectations placed on, but he needed a little time. He's actually sort of a key player, I think, in terms of if John Dixon and or Cam Smith can continue progressing and emerge and be able to take one of those corner spots, you might be able to shift Israel Mukuamu to safety, and that might be a really nice configuration for your secondary, and certainly will help you build some depth. So I think Cam, has a good chance to continue developing and play a bigger role. But again, we'll need a little bit more time, once the team gets back on the field to be able to assess that.
All right, Gamecocks country, I should say. What do you think about the 3 running backs we have? I think, and by the way, if you're not a subscriber on our YouTube, we're going to give you an answer now, but go to our YouTube page. It's all free, youtube.com/Gamecocks. We actually did a extensive look at the running back position and posted that this morning. So if you want a deeper look at running backs, just go check that out on our YouTube page. And obviously, everybody subscribe on there and subscribe here on Instagram or follow us on Instagram, whatever, and get all of our content, because we're going to be doing these daily videos. I believe we're going to try to have something new for you on YouTube pretty much every day. So subscribe for those. It's free, and hopefully it's good. I think the running backs are, considering they lost 4 seniors from last year's team, I think South Carolina feels really good about their running backs. I do as well. I think the wild card guys is Zaquandre White. He's the JUCO coming in, number 1 JUCO in the country. Really talented kid. I think you know what you have in Marshawn Lloyd. It's weird to say that as a freshman, but you do. He is what they thought he was as a 5-star. Kevin Harris can be a solid option. Deshaun Fenwick can help you. Zaquandre is the guy, I think, who can come in and really provide another, dynamic element to that position, which is what I think Marshawn Lloyd will do for South Carolina as well. So, yeah, but like I said, we got way more in-depth. We talked for like 20 minutes on running backs alone. You just go to our YouTube page, Gamecock Central. Kyle Foster, 95. Chris, for you, what will we see out of Pickens this year? Does he bring a different element than Kinlaw?
I don't know that Kinlaw lacked anything really last year, except for maybe the one thing you could point to is at times he wasn't as consistent. But when he was on, man, he was dominant. You don't really see many guys like him, and that's why he was a top 15 pick in the NFL draft, and the 49ers are investing millions of dollars in him, because he's big, can run, he can play the run, he can split double teams, he can beat guys one-on-one, he can push the pocket and rush the passer, and we saw a lot of that, last year, and against some great competition. You think of his best games and some of his best plays, they were against Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, and Florida. And 3 of those 4 were losses because they were really, really good teams that South Carolina was facing, but the competition was really good. And Kinlaw was pretty on and consistent in terms of being able to play those guys and play very well. So to get back to Pickens, that's another key for this defense, man, is can Zach Pickens and Rick Sandage, can they come along and take that next step? And physically they can. And so, I look not only to Pickens, but Sandage. Both those guys are very important. Pickens, I think, had a little bit of work to do when he got to South Carolina and just conditioning and continue to learn transition to an inside player. But he has a huge upside. Not many guys have the upside of Javon Kinlaw because he was so good in that department from a physical standpoint. But really like Zach's game, and I think he can certainly take a step forward. And if they can get solid production out of the 4 or 5 guys that they've got inside, including Pickens, then I think they'll be fine there on the interior and still be able to have a good defensive line.
All right, let's go back to YouTube. Moses Joyner. I wonder if this is Joyner's cousin or something. He wants to know about the carry-on Joyner. So Moses Joyner, I think that the carry-on can be a weapon for South Carolina. I do think that and we're going to do our receiver breakdown here soon in the next couple of days, probably on YouTube. But I think he's one of the guys that it really hurt not being able to go through spring practice, because it's like one thing after the next. It's first they tried to move him to receiver, and quarterback started getting hurt, so he had to play quarterback and wide receiver. Then what happens? Carry-on himself gets hurt, so you have an issue there. Then he's going to fully concentrate on receiver this spring. Virus happens, and you only get 5 practices. So I think it's tough for me to still put a ton of expectations on him, but you still look at the upside. You look at the potential of what it could be. The fact that he was able to step in basically without much work at all at wide receiver and was your second string slot receiver last year right off the bat tells me something about his natural ability and what he could be able to do for South Carolina this year. So I think for him, he's one of those guys that's just about getting everything back to where you can practice again and letting him get reps and sort of going from there. If he's a starter, then I think that's a very good sign, because that means he's stepped up to the point that he's taken the slot receiver position and allowed Trey Smith to move to the outside, which is what I think they would do, in that scenario. So, yeah, we'll see if that happens, but obviously potential is there for the carry-on Joyner. All right, David and SC on YouTube. Chris, will Shiloh Sanders play and contribute this year?
Yeah, I think he'll play some. I don't know if I'd set the bar too high right now. I mean, my understanding is when he came in, it's still a little bit raw. Obviously, learning safety, it's a position where, you're far away from the ball. Will Muschamp often says, the closer you are to the ball, the more difficult it is to play. And that's true when you're talking about the line of scrimmage. But defensively, probably one of the more tough positions to play is going to be that safety spot, because there's so much mentally to know. And so there's, again, you look at the fact you don't go through a full spring, that can set back a young player. But I think from a special teams perspective, he can play. And South Carolina is going to be searching for some safety depth and some safety help. And so I think he'll be in that mix. Are there a few guys ahead of him right now? I would say so. But he's going to have a chance as a red shirt freshman, I think, to get in there and make an impact and just see how he does.
Seth Rigsby wants to know the difference in impact that Connor Shaw will have on the program off the field versus Marcus Lattimore. I think that's probably very hard to answer unless you're there with the guys on a day-to-day basis. I will say this, different guys, different personalities. Marcus is going to be Marcus, obviously. Connor is going to be Connor. I'm sure Marcus helped point Connor in the right direction and had some materials and stuff. I know that Will Muschamp has been happy with what Connor has done so far, trying to keep the team together, organizing and together, obviously not literally together, but virtually together, and trying to organize virtual team activities, playing Madden tournaments, stuff like that. So I think both those guys are very, very, first of all, good people, which is important in that job, in that line of work. They're smart guys. They're driven guys. They care. Is it going to be a little bit different? I'm sure they're different guys, different personalities, but I think both those guys will do a really good job with that. Let's see. I think we're about done. Avery Jones wants to say, what's it going to say about our program if Jake Bentley has a great season at Utah? Chris, I would say not much. I think Jake Bentley, for all the crap he sometimes got from a certain segment of the fan base, if he was healthy this past year, he would have broken every single passing record that exists in the South Carolina record book. So, it's not like Jake Bentley was a terrible quarterback at South Carolina. I think Jake came in as a freshman, was thrown into a situation. He did his best. He helped South Carolina salvage the first year of the Muschamp era. Did it end the way Jake Bentley wanted? I'm sure it didn't. Did it all ever completely, consistently click together like he wanted? I would say probably not, but the guy won quite a bit of games in his time at South Carolina. And I personally, now, what's going to happen with the Pac 12 at this point if schools in California maybe aren't even playing ball? I don't know. But aside from all that, I think Jake is going to go out to Utah. He's going to be with a team that I'm assuming will again have a really good defense. They have had a good defense under Kyle Whittingham in recent years. I think Jake is going to put up some numbers out there. So, what do you think? What is it? Will it say anything about South Carolina if Jake has a huge year at Utah?
I mean, I don't know if maybe the question just sort of meant like, was he trying to get out of South Carolina because the program wasn't going well or something? I think there are a lot of layers to it. And for Jake, it was just a fresh start and a chance to go play for a really good team in Utah. I mean, that's been a good program with a lot of consistency for the most part under Whittingham. And my understanding is they do have a lot of talent coming back west, and he'll be walking into a good situation. And he's healthy now. My understanding, he's ready to go. Obviously, with things on hold, but ready to go once things open back up. And we know he's got talent. So I think if he's got a good supporting cast around him and he's walking into a good situation, and for Jake, it's about getting into a positive situation and maximizing his stock and just getting a fresh start. He's got a guy that, from a physical standpoint, has a chance to go and maybe play professionally. And so, for him, I think it was a decision of just taking all the factors into account, what's best for him. And so I don't know if it really says a lot. Quarterbacks transfer a lot. And I think maybe looking and having a guy where he could come back and play his senior season, maybe sometimes you say, well, he didn't really technically have anybody in front of him, so why leave? But I think there's just a lot that goes into those type of decisions, and Jake thought it was best for him. So I wouldn't read too awful much into that from a program perspective right now.
All right, let's see. Final thing, Kyle Foster says he's ready to see a full season from Trey Smith. I agree, man. I think that's the key to this thing. They're going to need, I think there's talent in the receiver room, but they're going to need one of these guys, a healthy Trey Smith, a second-year Xavier Legette, a Joyner who we talked about earlier. They're going to need one or two of these guys to just take that next step. And, South Carolina has had a history of getting pretty good wide receiver play, man. And I think we maybe even appreciated, I guess is the word. I think we underappreciated the job that a bunch of those guys did, especially even going back to the Spurrier era. Your random Gamecock game of the day, which I had on YouTube today, is the 2014 South Carolina Auburn game at Auburn, which was that's the game Steve Spurrier just said, screw it, I'm going to go for every fourth down. I don't care. And Dylan Thompson in that offense went up and down the field. And you look, even, we talk about obviously the Alshons and the Brian Edwards and the Pharaoh Coopers, but Shaq Rowland, to me, one of the talents that when you look what could have been, I mean, this dude was as talented as they come. Nick Jones, I think, is underrated, what he did. Bruce Ellington is underrated, what he did. Demir Bird, who's stayed in the league for almost 10 years now. I'm trying to think of who else was playing receiver on that team. But South Carolina has consistently gotten good receiver play, I think, for a long time. If you look back at their recent history, just of the guys, not even your top guys, your complimentary players. So can Legette, can Ortre, can Joyner, can those guys just be complementary threats? And can Shi Smith take the step and be the guy? I think those are all questions that will very strongly determine South Carolina's success on offense. And then I think you look at Rico Powers, you look at Caldwell from Northwestern, and the freshmen are going to have a chance to play. So I think there's a lot to work with at receiver potentially, but there's a lot of questions as well.
Yeah, agree with you. And we're running down to 50 seconds on Instagram Live, but Yeah, I mean, well, I'm sure, like Wes said, we're going to record more on receivers here soon, and it'll be another breakdown piece. But they got to find some consistency there. It starts with Shi Smith and on down to some of the younger guys or even the veteran guys that are coming back. Stay healthy. That's the key. Establish a run game, and I think that can help some of those players. And Ortre's certainly a part of that if he can return to his freshman year form.
How many seconds we got, Chris?
25.
All right, guys. On Instagram, we appreciate it. YouTube will tell you bye as well. If you're not a subscriber, get on there right now, GamecockCentral.com. Promotional code Gamecocks 2020 will get you a free trial from now until August 1st. Otherwise, subscribe to us on YouTube. Obviously, I guess you're already following us on Instagram, but pay attention to all of our content on there. We'll have complete coverage of all of your South Carolina football, recruiting, basketball, baseball, and all your needs. So appreciate everybody joining us. Until next week, and we'll have a podcast coming out later this week as well. It's a day late compared to when it normally is, but we'll have that coming out probably on Thursday, I would think. So be on the lookout for that. Otherwise, we appreciate the time, and we'll see you all soon.